Continuing with our fake atomics analysis video series, we're now moving on to the country of France. The French were ravaged by World War II and over the next decade and a half suffered the loss of French Indochina in the military farce of the Second Arab-Israeli War, where Israel got Britain and France to try and invade Egypt to seize the Suez Canal in 1956, but all three countries ended up having to pull out due to pressure from the US, Soviet Union and the UN. France felt it was no longer a world power and couldn't really rely on the support of other countries. So the French managed to get a nuclear reactor working by the late 40s, but could only extract very small amounts of nuclear material. And by the mid-50s, the French were actively working on a nuclear weapon. This call came to a head by 1960 when the French were able to detonate their first nuclear bomb. So, 15 years after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the French joined the nuclear club. Now, there's a good documentary on YouTube called France's Nuclear Weapons, La Force de Frappe, which has some choice quotes I wanted to play here to put this all into context.
Depuis la réussite de son premier tir nucléaire en 1960, la France est entrée dans le club des puissances atomiques, aux côtés de l'Union soviétique, des États-Unis et de la Grande-Bretagne. L'organisation de toute l'institution militaire s'en trouve bouleversée. Dans le monde, deux blocs dominent et s'affrontent. L'Union soviétique, la Chine et les pays satellites d'un côté, de l'autre le monde libre, entraîné par les États-Unis. Les crises se succèdent. Blocus de Berlin, guerre de Corée, crise des missiles à Cuba. C'est la guerre froide, l'équilibre de la terreur. Les forces de l'OTAN et celles du pacte de Varsovie sont face à face. L'Europe vit dans la crainte d'un affrontement. La France veut affirmer son indépendance. L'armement atomique va lui en donner les moyens. Pour le général de Gaulle, il devient le pivot de la défense nationale.
Il faut voir l'arme nucléaire non pas uniquement comme une arme comme les autres, mais comme un symbole. C'est d'abord et avant tout un instrument politique, un instrument diplomatique pour assurer le statut de grande puissance que la France avait perdu au cours de la Seconde Guerre mondiale. Et sans aucun doute, pour le général de Gaulle, la force de frappe ou la force de dissuasion, telle qu'on va se mettre à l'appeler, est l'outil qui lui permet de s'asseoir à la table des grands.
You must see the nuclear weapon not like any other weapon but a symbol. First of all, it is a political instrument and a tool to sit at the table of the great powers. This is fantastic. This is exactly what I've been talking about. He's being completely honest when he's telling you this. It's a symbol, a tool, an instrument to sit at the table of the great powers. It's a way for France to get its groove back.
Penser que la France, devenue une puissance nucléaire, pourrait assurer seule sa sécurité et qu'elle ne serait plus dans la position de quémander, comme c'était le cas quand il est arrivé à Londres, et comme ça a été le cas sans arrêt pendant très longtemps. Ce qui était pour lui profondément douloureux, profondément humiliant. Je me rappelle que je lui avais exposé ma thèse de la dissuasion proportionnée, en lui disant que, étant donné que nous étions une puissance relativement mineure sur l'échiquier mondial, il suffisait que nous soyons capables d'infliger à l'adversaire une petite quantité de mal pour qu'il nous respecte. Et le général s'était écrié, j'ai jamais oublié cette phrase, « Vous avez raison, il suffit que l'on soit capable de leur arracher un bras. »
And again here, General de Gaulle, running France post-World War II, he's saying, right, what can we do to get ourselves back on the map? How can we be a power again? How can we be respected again? And how do we have a deterrent to stop the Soviet Union just steamrolling into France and taking over? We need to have this super weapon.
C'était tellement important, si vous voulez, de voir notre pays devenir puissance nucléaire, et ça l'est toujours, parce qu'on ne parle jamais à une puissance nucléaire comme on parle à une puissance qui ne l'est pas. faut quand même avoir ça en tête.
And again, it's very much like with the English at the time, where we needed to get our sense of self-esteem back, we needed to get our power back, and we did this through getting this symbolic weapon. And so the French realised, look, we need to have this thing, and it took them so long. It took them until 1960. You know, the nuclear bomb in the Manhattan Project, they only started working on the plutonium implosion bomb in 1944. By 1945 they had Trinity and they did Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It took them about a year, you know, less than a year. They had the fission down, the English were working on it, the French were working on it, they understood the principle of nuclear fission. It would take 15 years for them to get a bomb. And of course, when it finally got round to 1960, what type of bomb was it? Was it a gun type? Was it the simple design? No. It was a plutonium implosion bomb again. So the French were looking for a way to turn things around, and they would reach for the nuclear weapon as a symbol to play. And what's quite nice is that the conventional army doesn't need to be scrapped. You see, you can still funnel all that taxpayers' money into your tanks and planes and soldiers, which you would think was no longer necessary because the whole thing could operate purely off deterrence. But no. You see, you actually still need to have all the squaddies and all the tanks and all the helicopters because we have the need for a kind of dike or border wall of soldiers to stop the Soviets coming in. So in the next clip you can see again how massively outnumbered and outgunned the French were and why they needed this deterrent, but why there was still a need for the conventional military.
Derrière le rideau de fer, à 2 minutes de vol de Strasbourg, sont concentrées les forces du pacte de Varsovie. En première ligne, 55 divisions. 1 million d'hommes, 3 000 avions, 1 200 hélicoptères de combat, 16 000 chars, 10 000 pièces d'artillerie. Des forces 2 à 3 fois supérieures à celles de l'OTAN. La guerre est possible. Le scénario de l'affrontement est d'ailleurs prêt.
Si un pays envoyait à nos frontières une section en armes avec des intentions hostiles, vous avouerez que la menace de riposte nucléaire stratégique contre ce pays n'aurait aucun sens. C'est bien évident, pour une menace aussi faible. On conçoit en conséquence qu'il soit nécessaire de réaliser à nos frontières ou devant celles-ci une sorte de digue composée de forces blindées, d'infanterie et d'une aviation qui est chargée d'appuyer ces forces, d'en assurer la protection et aussi de frapper avec les armes classiques dans un premier temps les forces adverses. Si cette fameuse digue-là était sur le point de s'effondrer, il n'y a plus rien à faire, nous devions être capables, l'armée de terre comme nous-mêmes, de réaliser sur les forces adverses, et non pas au cœur du pays, sur les forces adverses, une frappe, tous les deux ensemble, qui n'était pas renouvelable, une seule, de telle sorte que l'adversaire savait qu'après ça, il n'y avait plus qu'une chose pour nous, c'était la riposte au cœur du pays. C'est-à-dire qu'il y avait un couplage extrêmement étroit entre ce qu'on appelle l'engagement de notre corps de bataille, cette frappe qu'on a appelée nucléaire tactique, qu'on a rebaptisée ensuite, peu importe, et la frappe stratégique. Les trois se tenaient étroitement.
Le combat est prévu pour durer 7 jours. Après, c'est le déclenchement de l'arme suprême.
So we get to late 50s. You have de Gaulle basically saying, look, we're going to have a nuke by early 1960. This is definitely going to happen. And while the Americans and the Russians and the British are trying to reach a kind of an agreement of non-proliferation and saying, well, look, we actually, you know what, we've talked a lot about these big nukes and everything, but actually let's just try and de-escalate this a bit. The French are steamrolling into making and building their own nuclear weaponry because they want to join the big club. So the French are, at this point, they're actually at war with and dealing with French North Africa, or French Sahara, which is an area involving Tunisia and Algeria. Now, what they end up doing is setting off a bomb in middle of nowhere in near a very small settlement called Regan in Algeria. This is an incredibly desolate and isolated region. So they set off a bomb called Jerboa Bleu, which is blue jerboa in English. Jerboa is a small sort of field rat creature that lives in the desert there. So it's the sort of the blue rat test. Now this bomb, blue jerboa, in previous detonations, you know, we've had Trinity 15 kiloton, we've had things like Able Baker 23 kiloton. The French are like, nah, we're going to show off better than that. Not only are we going to detonate a nuke, not only are we going to do a plutonium implosion bomb first time, it's not going to be 15 kiloton, it's not going to be 23 kiloton, it's going to be about 60 to 70 kiloton. So you can see they're really trying to compensate here. They've got to have a not just a nuke, but like a super huge detonation first time. So this should be interesting. What do we have in terms of evidence?
At Regan, deep in the Sahara, France goes forward with the detonation of her first atomic bomb, defying a United Nations resolution, the heated protests of Japan and most of Africa's newly independent nations, and the disapproval of both America and the Soviet. Since the autumn of 1958, Britain, the United States, and Russia have voluntarily suspended nuclear tests, and for 15 months have been trying to reach agreement on a formula to ban all atomic weapons development. Now, France presses forward with this first in a series of firings to force her way into the exclusive nuclear club. This first blast is on a level with bombs exploded over Hiroshima and Nagasaki in World War II. The 250th nuclear weapon explosion in history carries France a step further towards General de Gaulle's dream of national glory restored.
So that's an interesting little propaganda video there. It's interesting that they try and fudge it by saying that the bomb that you're about to see go off is equivalent to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, when of course that isn't true. It's considerably larger, and the explosion looks. Well, again, we have no sense of scale because it's the usual dark background on sand, and it's just a fireball. So it doesn't look dramatically larger than other nuclear tests that we've seen or explosions that we've seen. So let's see if there's any photo evidence. So this is the photo of the Blue Jerboa testing site before detonation. It's got the little tower there in the sand. We've got a nice photo here of some dummies dressed up in French uniforms propped up on sticks. Presumably this is to test to see whether or not a 60 kiloton nuclear bomb damages soldiers. I would have thought by 1960 the answer to that would be yes. I don't understand why you'd even need to test that, but hey, I guess it looks good from a theatrical point of view. Here's a photo of the testing site after the explosion, taken from a plane. There doesn't appear to be much in the way of a crater there. I mean, this is on sand or dirt strata. I'm not sure why there's not a larger crater given the scale of the bomb. I'm also not sure why there's no glassing, because in such a dry and arid environment with the sandy surface, you would expect there to be some clear, glassing of the ground, but we can't see anything. It just looks like a scorch mark, essentially. So yeah, that's not particularly impressive. This is a still taken from the Force to Frappe documentary where they flew the plane over it, so it's in colour. Again, you can see there's no glassing. It's just sort of scorched or almost like it just looks like wet sand, effectively, from that height. This is supposed to be another video of Jerboa Bleu going off. For some reason, it appears to be in the pitch black of night, despite it being a morning detonation. The bomb was supposed to go off about 7:30 in the morning. This appears to be in the middle of the night, and again, it's just a fireball explosion. The scale appears to be nothing dramatically massive compared to the alleged 23 kiloton detonation of Baker. This is supposed to be about 3 times the size of it. It doesn't look that impressive. Then we've got some interesting photos they released of the cloud post-detonation. So this is the first one. Then we've got this, which is even stranger. I'm not sure what this is supposed to be even. I mean, I know it's meant to be a cloud, but what is going on in this? And then finally this dramatic photograph of a 65 kiloton nuclear bomb going off, which looks like nothing of any great power or significance. We've got this one from a distance, which just looks like a bit of cloud over some mountain on a sunny day. And then finally we've got some pictures of the Jerbois Blue test, first with some presumably French filmmakers or photographers for the army shooting the detonation. That does not look like a nuclear bomb has gone off, and they are wearing no protective gear. This photo, which now has the filmmakers all at very strange heights, especially compared to the chap in the middle, compared to the guy on the far left filming, who looks like a dwarf in comparison, looking at this floaty grey cloud in the sky in the distance. And a third version of this photo where the chap on the left is now a silhouette completely, and the guy on the far right in his coat appears to be floating on the sand, possibly cropped in. I'm wondering, because of the difference in detailing and light on all of them, just what this image is. Are any of these people actually in the frame? Is that really supposed to be a nuclear cloud in the distance? And where are they? Why is it just pure sand all around them? So after this dramatic event, which was of course a purely military only event, they didn't have any journalists there. It was essentially just the French announced to the world, hey, by the way, we did this, and then they provided the footage and photos you've just seen to say, yeah, we definitely did this. This is totally a real thing. Middle of nowhere, no proper witnesses. They then proceeded to shift their subsequent tests to an even more hard to monitor location, which was in fact underground at the Oasis military testing centre in Eka. So again, Algeria. The French were now detonating their alleged nuclear weapons in tunnels underneath the mountains there. So we don't have any photos or footage of any of this. We just have the French telling us that they did it. That's about it. So by the late 60s, the French then relocated all their nuclear testing to the South Pacific, where they, again, allegedly carried out a couple hundred tests there. We have some fantastic photos of this. So we have these 3 photos of the Mururoa Atoll detonation, which are definitely legit photos. Just have a look at that. The islands are pristine and habitable, by the way, to this day, with lush plant growth and so on. They're not glass craters, just like with Bikini Atoll. There's nothing wrong with the atoll at Mururoa, despite all the hundreds of tests carried out. We also have Canopus, which definitely hasn't had the colour saturation played around with. It doesn't look heavily edited at all. And then later on, when the French needed to up their game and get one of these special Nuke 2.0 hydrogen bombs, we have this wonderful video from Associated Press.
Britain's top bathing beauties, 3 very happy girls. The island of Fangatoeufa in the Pacific, and beneath that balloon, the first French hydrogen bomb. France didn't sign the nuclear test ban treaty. 7:30 a.m. local time. Once again, an evil mushroom cloud grows over the Pacific. The bomb, about the size of a small car, had a force equal to 3 million tons of TNT. The French authorities described the test as a success. It certainly made its mark on Fangatoeufa, but there was little radioactive fallout. In our uneasy world, France now becomes the 5th H-bomb power.
I love the fact that there's little radioactive fallout, and despite again the supposed ferocity of the explosion, it's just a dressed set. So it's exactly the same as the original Pathé video I did, where they just dressed a few, like, you know, flip cars and things, or a bit of bricks stacked up, or some dummies stacked up. And then you've got like a crane toppled over on the side, and a Jeep flipped. Oh god, the humanity of it. Look at what the hydrogen bomb has done. It's flipped the Jeep. So yeah, and I'll stop there, because it's just France embarrassing itself, basically. They wanted to be big players at the table. They set off a car bomb in Algeria to try and scare the local Algerians into not having a revolution against French occupational rule, and B, arguably the more important one, was to, you know, join the nuclear club. You can imagine the Americans back in CIA headquarters or whatever rolling their eyes at this and going, "Oh God, not another one," after the English muscling into the conference room. Now the French are here too. Soviets are slapping their forehead, thinking, "Oh God, now we got to keep up this charade." And now they're detonating underground bombs, and it just gets more ridiculous from there. So we're going to move on. So we're going to move on to China now, the next attendee of the nuclear club. The Chinese didn't get the bomb until 1964. If we look at the Atomic Heritage Foundation website article about China and the nuclear bomb, we see that what really happened to kick this all off was after the death of Stalin, the first secretary of the Communist Party, so essentially the head of the Soviet Union, Nikita Khrushchev, gave a speech where he denounced Stalin and said that actually he was a maniac. This was taken badly by Soviet ally Chairman Mao, and who felt that this was impugning Mao's reputation by proxy. Mao, essentially there was a difference of personality between Mao and Khrushchev. The Soviets and the Chinese then drifted apart, so despite both being communist and ostensibly you'd think they'd have some sort of unified empire together, they kind of went their own ways as separate nations, essentially. So Mao was worried that the Soviets were gonna bomb them and take them over. There was a bit of paranoia there. He didn't like the fact they could be vulnerable to nuclear attack. The Soviets, for their part, were saying that we're not going to supply you with nuclear materials. We're not going to help you build bombs. So the Chinese were in a situation where they needed a deterrent against the Soviet Union, and so they needed nuclear weaponry. And so what we get is this culminates in the Project 596 detonation on the 16th of October 1964, where Project 596 was a 22 kiloton uranium implosion bomb. It's done in the Lopnur Desert, which is in the northwest of China. So again, very isolated desert place. And so we have the following images of this endeavour. So this is the bomb being wheeled into position. Now it's interesting that it's obviously like a cylinder barrel-shaped bomb. If it was meant to be an implosion bomb, you would expect it to be spherical, like the Fat Man or like any of the other implosion type designs depict. Then we have the actual detonation itself, which, considering this is roughly equivalent to the Baker Cloud detonation, is rather unimpressive. We then have this in colour, which looks very much like a regular chemical detonation, given the fact there's orange fire in the cloud. It's a combustion explosion, it's not a fission explosion, as discussed in other examples. And then we have what I would refer to as the hurrah photos, which is this, and this. So these photos are obviously doctored. The first one, the cloud doesn't even look like a nuclear cloud. It's very, very faint and wispy. You've got this second one where they've put more detail in the cloud. but they've had to just sort of insert silhouettes of people cheering, and then this third one that's in colour, and again it's just doctored. These people have no protection, they're far too close to the explosion, etc., etc. It's the same nonsense that we've seen before in other examples. So all of this is distinctly unimpressive. The photography is clearly edited. This one, the original detonation photo, I mean, like, fair enough, it's an explosion, but it certainly doesn't look anything like the Baker detonation. And yeah, then we have the videos of their explosion going off. So we'll start with this fantastic propaganda video. So this is from the Lopner detonation. So we have a sort of a Chinese armoured forces making their way across the desert, and as the camera pans around, we can see, oh my god, they're driving straight at the mushroom cloud. The bomb was obviously just gone off moments before. We now have motorbikes driving towards it with some nice Chinese characters on the background that haven't been affected by the bomb blast. This wispy white cloud. Now men on horses, people on horses riding towards the nuclear bomb detonation zone of a 23 kiloton bomb. A pylon has fallen over, the devastation, but the tanks continue regardless. And we have troops actually sat out on the tank, not even wearing protection there, and more there. And there's a lot of, dust being kicked up because of the horses. And yeah, you run. So the idea here is the Chinese are showing us that they had a nuclear strike regiment where they would nuke your position and then they could send in soldiers straight away through the wreckage. This is obviously ridiculous and farcical. The very idea that you need an infantry strike force to take a position that has had a nuclear detonation is in and of itself absurd. The fact that you think you can put some gas masks on horses and ride into battle, it just beggars belief. So this rather leads me to believe that the Chinese have absolutely no idea of what a nuclear bomb is meant to be, other than in the most abstract sense of some sort of very large artillery shell going off. Yeah, it just utterly ridiculous, basically. So then we have some footage of these, Chinese army personnel constructing a settlement out in the desert, and then gathering around to view the detonation. And they've actually got the poor bastards sat there, again, no protection, no goggles, no eye protection, nothing, and they're literally sat on, like it's a cinema, like a theatre or something, and they're sat there to stare directly at the bomb as it goes off. So again, that would mean they'd be blinded, but not in this case, of course. And so this is meant to be a, Baker equivalent sized atomic bomb going off. So that's sort of the raw footage of the Lopner detonation. The next clip is from an American sort of newsreel footage. So let's have a look at that.
At 1500 hours on October 16th, 1964, the event which shocked the whole world finally takes place.
I like how the Chinese didn't bother with special cameras. Because, the French and the British and the US, they always talk about their special cameras. Chinese have just got some regular film cameras on a stick, unsupported, and like a telescope at the end. So they're just going to prop those up and have a 23 kiloton bomb go off nearby. It's just regular film. It's just totally normal. They're just going to put a camera in it, like it's a home movie they're making.
Ten, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Our nation's first atomic bomb is a success. The atomic bomb designed and made by our own nation is a complete success. Our nation's first nuclear test surpasses the levels of the first nuclear tests of the United States, Britain, and France. This is the result of the efforts of our nation's workers, engineers, technical personnel, scientists, officers and men of the People's Liberation Army, and all those concerned who willingly raised high the great red flag of Mao Zedong's thought, gave prominence to politics, creatively studied and used Chairman Mao's works, and concentrated their efforts to wage a battle of annihilation with united and vigorous cooperation. This is a gigantic success of Mao Zedong's thought. This is a gigantic success of the General Line. Long live the Chinese Communist Party. Long live Chairman Mao.
And then the same clip also covers another detonation. They did a second nuclear detonation in 1965.
The combat teams are given pre-combat political indoctrination to prepare for an intense struggle maneuver. Another stimulating and jubilant day arrives on May 14th, 1965. Our nation successfully explodes its second nuclear bomb in the sky over the western part of our country. Extremely accurate and extremely successful explosion. This demonstrates the great results of cooperation among leaders, specialists, and the masses, and of the cooperation of education with research. This is another victory song for Mao Zedong's thought.
So again, we have the nonsense of the fireball cloud, it being too small, it being, close-ups of the little matchstick buildings and a yurt being knocked over. Just absolute ridiculous nonsense. You can really see how the quality of the propaganda decreases as we're going to places like China, because they just, they can just show you complete nonsense and you're expected to swallow it, and that's for their regular day-to-day treatment of their own citizens. They think that they can show this and it's credible, and it clearly isn't. The very fact that the Chinese don't understand that by nuking a place, especially at a level of say 20 or above kilotons, the very fact they don't understand that you don't need to use it as a large artillery piece to clear an embedded infantry position, which then needs to be rushed and claimed by your troops, leads me to wonder if they even understand what a nuclear bomb actually is in principle. If you drop a nuclear bomb of that size on an area, you've completely incinerated everything, you've glassed it, and the psi pressure will have flattened everything for several kilometres in every direction. You have no need to rush to take the bunker or the trench, because there is no trench. It's going to be glassed. So the fact they've got these ridiculous commandos running in on their motorbikes and their horses and whatnot, and they think that they can ride a horse through an irradiated firestorm, which would be raging for hours afterwards. Let alone the fact that all of them would just be destroyed by the psi shockwave, or the ionizing radiation would kill the animal and so on. It's just absolutely, it beggars belief. It beggars belief. So the Chinese seem to have this idea that the nuclear bomb is just sort of a very large conventional explosive, and they're operating on that basis. So it's also quite interesting if you read about the Chinese nuclear weapons program on the Atomic Heritage site. It has this section here. It says the Chinese top scientist Qian Santiang travelled to East Germany in July of 1959, and he met up with Klaus Fuchs to have a chat with him about how to make an implosion bomb. I think this is interesting for two reasons. So firstly, it's interesting that, again, they're having to go all the way back to the Manhattan Project personnel to get an idea on how to build a nuclear bomb, even though this is now 20-year-old technology essentially. The second point here is that Fuchs has somehow managed to be a German scientist who gets into the Manhattan Project via the British, works on the bomb, is a spy, feeds information back to his handler with the evil shark eyes and soulless grin, Agent Sonia, then is able to, despite being found out, as of the late 50s, is now kicking it about in East Germany and now passing the same kind of info over to the Chinese. I think that's very strange, because now I'm thinking Fuchs is kind of like he's kind of like a, I don't know how best to describe it, a sort of a Deus Ex Machina in the script. He's like a very useful tool in the script of this narrative, where, how does this faction get the bomb? How does this faction get the bomb? Well, it's Klaus Fuchs. This guy just kind of rocks up and gives the key information to the right people repeatedly, allowing this new group to have access to this supposedly restricted weapon. I mean, you would think the nuclear secrets would be kept pretty tight, and you'd think that the eyes on these people, prominent scientists, especially prominent scientists who've already been spies and found to be spies, you think that would be kept pretty tight. You wouldn't think that the Russians would want the Chinese to have this, because, of course, Khrushchev has already said, no, don't give any information to the Chinese. So now you've got the idea that Fuchs... Now, what I'm saying is, it was almost credible to me that you'd have this guy be a spy, thus explaining how the Soviets got the technology. But now he's also supposed to be the guy who gives the Chinese the technology. So now he's just this kind of gadfly flitting about and handing over diagrams and calculations to people. Is he really actually a spy, in the sense that is this a genuine beat in the narrative, or is it in fact that Fuchs is basically just an excuse for how the elite can sell this narrative to us and say, it was this guy Fuchs? It just seems very unlikely that he would be involved twice now in spying to give a major faction the key information, and none of his handlers, or not, the police, the intel community, they wouldn't be keeping tabs on him. They wouldn't be putting a stop to that. No alarms would go off when the head of the Chinese nuclear project travels all the ways to East Germany and gives him a phone call and organises a meet in a coffee shop or whatever. How does that happen? How does that happen realistically? So I think what we're looking at here is it's ridiculous that the Chinese would have it. It's ridiculous that Fuchs would give them the information. The Chinese clearly don't have a nuclear bomb. The footage and the photographs are silly as usual. The propaganda they've released is very telling, because it indicates that they don't even know what a nuke really is, what it's supposed to be. Even the fiction of it, as I believe they are completely fictional weapons, the idea of what you're supposed to have happen when one detonates, and they're looking at putting gas masks on horses and things. It's just so ridiculous. And the reason they're doing it is because they want to be able to argue on an international level, and they want to be able to fight back against the Americans and the Russians. They want to hold their own, and so they do this 596 thing, and that's that. And then by 1967, when they need to escalate this nonsense again because of the hydrogen bombs, so everybody's got to lie a second time and say, oh god, yeah, we've got hydrogen bombs as well. The Chinese have this video, which I can only describe as sort of a combination of stop motion animation, student film, and gibberish. But yeah, I'm just going to play it and see what you think.
6月17日，共和国的第一颗氢弹在西部地区上空爆炸成。
So yeah, I don't really feel like I need to comment too much on that. If you think that was some kind of new super weapon being displayed, good for you. But I'm pretty much done with China. This is again, I've covered the main evidence they present to having nuclear weapons, the photos, the videos. It's obviously absurd. It's palpably absurd, as is the French efforts from earlier, as with all the countries that we've seen. But it gets worse because now we're going to go to India to see what the Indians are doing.
On 18th May 2019, India marks the 45th anniversary of its first nuclear test known as Pokhran-1. It was on this day in 1974 on Buddha Jayanti. The bomb was detonated on the army base, Pokhran Test Range in Rajasthan by the Indian Army under the supervision of several key Indian generals. Described by India as a peaceful nuclear explosion, this test was carried out underground and codenamed Smiling Buddha.
So Smiling Buddha was a plutonium implosion bomb the Indians allegedly set off in May of '74. They set off the bomb in a pit they'd sealed up underneath an army testing range in the middle of nowhere in northwest India in the desert. You can see a photo of the bomb casing here. It's supposed to be another plutonium implosion bomb. This is clearly a gun-type bomb by design. It looks exactly like a gun-type bomb because it's a thin, narrow cylinder, as opposed to, a sort of a Fat Man style rounded bomb to allow space for the multiple charges. So that's a bit of a fail to start with. There's also an issue with the load of the bomb in terms of the kiloton strength. The yield is supposed to be about 12 to 13 kilotons, but it's been quoted as high as up to 20 kilotons. And other groups have tried to analyse the seismic data, then it can go down to 6, 4, or even as low as 2 kilotons. So quite exactly how big this bomb is rather unclear. I think the updated idea is it's supposed to be around 8 kilotons, but it was a shock to everyone that the Indians were able to pull off the nuclear detonation, especially because there was no heads up that they were organising it. They managed to do the project in secrecy. There's this nice little screen grab I've got for you here which shows how the troops they had digging the shaft were basically untrained, weren't very good at it, and managed to hit water. They managed to tunnel into an aquifer the first time they tried digging a pit to house the bomb, so they had to sink a completely new shaft in February, and this was only completed a few days before the test. So they wouldn't seem to be particularly well prepared, and I'm rather sceptical of the photos they've got of the bomb casing to begin with. When we see the actual detonation as well, You're basically just looking at an explosion that could be used to, dig for a quarry or something. It's nothing particularly special or unique. The accompanying photos as well don't exactly inspire. This one is supposed to show the upheaval mound lifted by the test explosion, which is supposed to be this almost looks like sort of an Ayers Rock thing on the horizon. That's supposed to be the Earth getting kicked up. We've got the subsidence crater here and here and here, which is just... Well, I can believe it's a 2 kiloton explosion, put it like that, and this is easily just explained as India was needing to have deterrence against China and Pakistan. They also had issue with the Americans having the nuclear power and India not being at the table in the same way as all the other countries like France and England, and so they detonated a conventional explosive underneath the soil. And bish bash bosh, now they can enter the nuclear club. No issues with radiation, no glassing, no plant life issues because it's the desert. You've got this subsidence crater as the only evidence. We've got this little clip here where this chap helpfully explains how the Indian military were able to leave all the other intelligence communities in the world, including the US intelligence agencies, with egg on their face. They're able to pull this off and it'd be a complete surprise. So he explains it as this.
The plan was, how can we beat the satellite, keep it secret, and if you sent word around that you were doing it, that means the army comes, everybody comes, India, everyone talks. So I think one of the greatest credits is how you kept that whole test secret. And the way they did it was that they had code words for everything. So when they made phone conversations, they would never say this is the test site. They would say this is White House, this is the Taj Mahal, this was this, so that the code words would never work, never be detected by the others. They did all the work in the night. And it is the most difficult thing to do because in the desert, the breeze blows and the sands align themselves according to the wind. So if you dug something up, that will show up straight away like a big gash, like a wound in the earth. So what they did was that every night they'd work. They would then, in the morning, early morning, before the satellite could see what is happening, they would cover the sand and align it according to that and put the bush where it was. The idea was that it was an army range. If there was a huge influx of civilian people, a lot of civilian people came in there, immediately the satellite would pick up and know that there is more people that is there. So they all wore army uniforms. So when they came in, they looked like army people. The satellite was not able to.
So yeah, he's clarified. They used code words and costumes, and they only dug at night. And then in the morning, they moved everything back into position so the satellites wouldn't see. How could the CIA have foreseen that another country would use such new concepts as code words and disguises to help them in their endeavours? I'm sure no other country was doing that or had ever even tried to do that, and that's why India was so successful in bamboozling everybody. And then just finally, if we watch this clip from Indian state TV, we can see that they're not really sure with this one what happened with Pokhran. We've seen the initial footage of the implosion, the quarry bomb effect, as it were. Then we very quickly, in succession after that, see shots of a big pillar of smoke rising into the air, kind of like a mushroom cloud, and footage of men standing around in the bottom of the ravine, a hut nearby, and some rubble. And in fact, the Prime Minister Indira Gandhi visiting the site and walking around it, all of which without any real protection. But hey, of course, there was no radiation because of reasons. So at this point, the narrative of Pokhran and what was supposed to happen, was it just this implosion? Was there also a big mushroom cloud? What are these other detonations? It's all very strange. The Indians then don't detonate any other nuclear weapons for 24 years. So it takes us to 1998. It's at this point that Pakistan and India, both in a state of rivalry, both detonate their own nuclear devices pretty much around the same time. India detonates Pokhran 2 in early May and Pakistan in late May. So it's very convenient. India hasn't done anything for 24 years and there's no evidence of any of the bombs in that time. They've just basically kept the original device on ice in their archives for a quarter of a century. They then wheel it out and set off a second explosion. I'll just show the Pakistan one first because I think all I need to do is show you this photo of the Pakistani detonation and this video, and I don't think it needs much more comment.
चागी का वसी सहराई इलाका जहां पस मंजर में ऊंचे ऊंचे चटियल पहाड़ हैं, एटमी तजर्बे के लिए पाकिस्तानी साइंसदानों ने बटन दबाया तो जेर जमीन मीलों लंबी सुरंग में जबरदस्त इर्तियाश पैदा हुआ और पहाड़ों का रंग तब्दील होना शुरू हो गया। इसके बाद पहाड़ों पर जमी मिट्टी धूल बनकर बुलंद होना शुरू हुई। ऐसे महसूस हुआ जैसे बादल उठ रहे हैं। चागी के इस इलाके में दूर दूर तक आबादी का निशान नहीं है और इसी वजह से पाकिस्तानी साइंसदानों ने इस जगह का इंतखाब किया। एटमी धमाकों से किसी किस्म की ताबकारी के असरात नहीं फैले।
Bear in mind that Pakistan was under a lot of pressure to show some sort of defiance or ability to defend against India, so it makes sense to me that the generals would set off a bomb underneath the mountainside and a bit of dust to be kicked up to show that they had some fighting spirit left in them. The Indians then had this detonation, which we see in these photos, which again is supposed to be a nuclear charge going off underground, but yeah. So by the turn of the millennium, you had Pakistan saying, well, look, we've actually detonated 5 nuclear bombs with no release of radioactivity, and India was able to say, yeah, well, we've got our own bombs and they're even bigger. Nothing happened. There was no nuclear bombs have ever been used in anger. No terrorist has ever gotten hold of nuclear bombs, especially with and I'm not trying to give Pakistan a hard time with this, but especially with Islamic terrorism and Al Qaeda and things like that. You might think that would be an ideal way for the idea of Muslim terrorists to get a hold of a nuclear weapon and detonate in a Western city. But nothing's ever happened like that. No nuclear bombs have been dropped out of planes and exploded. There's been no train crashes carrying nuclear weapons that have then led to an explosion. If you look into that, that's a whole other aspect of this, that nuclear bombs have been completely flawless in not how they've been handled. There's been multiple disasters and problems where they have fallen out of planes, or planes have crashed, or trains have derailed, and there's been issues in silos and things like that, but there's never been an actual detonation, which is extraordinary. Given the the margin for error with these things. In terms of North Korea, because you might be wondering about that, the only reason that we think that North Korea has a nuclear weapon is that they say they have it, which is an obvious thing for them to say that they do, because they've been at war since the 1950s, and in their mindset they're still at war with South Korea, and they're worried of a military invasion from the south, and they're worried of the Americans attacking them. So the obvious thing to do is to say that you have a nuclear weapon, because then you're immune to attack, right? Because that's what this whole weapon idea establishes. So it keeps them safe by saying they have it. You wouldn't say you didn't have it, because then there'd be no reason not to attack them. And the US then actually plays into that, interestingly, and says, oh yes, no, we agree that the North Koreans have this because of seismic data, because it's all underground explosions. There's no visual evidence for it. There's no actual data for it. Just there are some rumblings underground, all right. And fantastically, the US claims that it was able to detect the nuke because it had a spy plane flying over North Korea, and the spy plane was able to detect xenon gas in the air, which is released by nuclear fission. Xenon is also a trace gas in the atmosphere, and it can also emit from things like mineral springs, lamps, anesthetics. So it's not the only source of its releases from nuclear fission. But apparently, this spy plane up in the atmosphere could detect this bomb. This was in 2006. The North Koreans apparently detonated a 0.48 kiloton yield bomb, so not even a 1 kiloton bomb underground, and apparently this led to the US saying, yeah, we've detected this. So yeah, the North Koreans have nukes now, and they've said that they've done other detonations since with other verifications from the US. But ultimately, you're looking at the US military. You're relying on the US military to tell the truth. I don't buy it. So yeah, there's not really much more to talk about now. I suppose I could kick more about with North Korea, but it's just, by this point, I think we've established that not a single one of the countries we've looked at has anything remotely persuasive to indicate that they actually have nuclear weapons. It's just a lot of chicanery and ridiculous photographs and a complete lack of radiation, and it's just everything's very convenient in its timing. So ultimately, I hope you come away from this series of videos with a bit of food for thought, at least. On the face of it, it would seem to be a pretty bold claim to say that nuclear weaponry doesn't exist, and even after demonstrating things with the American side of things in World War II, a lot of you were probably thinking, wow, come on, let's be sensible. What about all these other countries and all the evidence they must have? But just with my cursory analysis of, touching on a few key dates for these countries, we've not looked at everything. I've not been able to go through all the material. There's always more to talk about. But I think with what you have seen, it should definitely make you start to question whether or not the simple reality, which is there's so much nonsense, there's so many contradictions, there's so many inconsistencies. Nuclear weaponry is a fiction. You have nothing to worry about being nuked. Governments have bombs. Governments can spread radioactive material around, I guess, but it's not anything like it's portrayed to be in the movies, and you're not going to have a Armageddon scenario with nukes popping off like something out of Fallout. I hope you've enjoyed this series, and if you have any questions or follow-up things you want me to touch on, please leave a comment. I'm always happy to read from people who've enjoyed the videos. And yeah, like and share, and I hope to see you in the next video series.